The moment she took my hand and placed it gently against her waist, I forgot how to breathe. It was a bright Sunday afternoon, sunlight spilling through the curtains of the small guest room, birds calling from the trees outside, and yet everything around me suddenly felt silent. I had known Maricel for 11 years. She was my best friend, the person who knew every embarrassing story, every disappointment, every dream I had quietly buried. We had shared road trips, terrible apartments, family problems, late-night phone calls, and countless ordinary afternoons. But we had never crossed the invisible line between friendship and something more. Until that afternoon, when one unexpected situation forced us to share a bed, and she looked into my eyes as though she had finally decided to tell me something she had been carrying for years. If you believe that kindness, friendship, and second chances can change someone's life, take a moment to like, comment, share this story, and subscribe to Kindness Echoes. You never know when a simple act of kindness might become someone's reason to hope again. It had started that morning with something completely ordinary. Maricel was helping me prepare my late grandmother's old house for sale. I had inherited the place months earlier, but I kept postponing the work because every room carried memories I wasn't ready to release. Maricel knew that better than anyone. She arrived with coffee, sandwiches, and the determined expression she always wore whenever she decided I was being too stubborn to take care of myself. By noon, we had filled the hallway with boxes and opened every window to let the warm afternoon air move through the house. There was something peaceful about working beside her. We didn't need to fill every silence. Sometimes she would hand me a box without saying anything, and somehow I would know exactly where she wanted it. The problem came when a sudden plumbing leak flooded the small guest room downstairs. The contractor couldn't come until the following morning, and the rest of the house was crowded with boxes. There was only one usable bedroom left, and it had a single large bed. Maricel looked at it, then at me, and laughed at how ridiculous the situation was. She insisted that sharing a bed for one night was no big deal because we were adults, we trusted each other, and neither of us had anything to be embarrassed about. I agreed, pretending the idea didn't make my heart beat faster than it should have. We spent the afternoon finishing the work, but something had changed inside me. Every time she brushed past me, every time our hands accidentally touched while carrying a box, I became painfully aware of how close she was. By late afternoon, the house looked completely different. Sunlight poured across the wooden floor, revealing dust floating like tiny golden stars. We sat on the porch with cold drinks, exhausted but strangely happy. Maricel talked about how beautiful the house looked now, but I noticed she kept looking at me instead of the garden. There was a softness in her expression that I couldn't understand. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but fear stopped me. I had spent years protecting our friendship because losing her would have hurt more than never knowing what could have been. That evening, we returned to the bedroom. The room was still filled with warm daylight because the sun had not yet disappeared behind the trees. We sat on opposite sides of the bed, both pretending to be interested in our phones. Finally, Maricel put hers aside and told me that there was something she had wanted to say for a very long time. She explained that she had watched me move through relationships that never seemed to make me happy. She had watched me give pieces of myself to people who didn't appreciate them, and every time I came back hurt, she had been the person waiting to put me back together. What she never told me was that every time I chose someone else, a small part of her wondered why I had never looked at her the way she looked at me. I stared at her, unable to find the right words. She smiled nervously and admitted that she had been afraid too. She was terrified that telling me the truth would destroy the friendship she valued more than anything. For years, she had convinced herself that being beside me was enough. But lately, she had realized that pretending not to love someone doesn't make the feeling disappear. It only makes the loneliness harder to hide. Then came the moment I would remember for the rest of my life. She moved closer, took my hand, and gently placed it against her waist. There was no rush and nothing inappropriate about the gesture. It was simply a quiet way of asking me to stop running from what was already in front of us. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope, as though she was prepared for me to pull away. Instead, I stayed. I told her the truth I had been too afraid to admit. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped being just my best friend. She had become the person I searched for in every room, the person I wanted to call whenever something good happened, the person whose happiness mattered to me more than my own pride. I realized that I hadn't been protecting our friendship all those years. I had been protecting myself from the possibility of loving her and losing her. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. We didn't make promises about forever that afternoon. We didn't suddenly pretend that years of friendship had erased all the complications that could come with changing the relationship. Instead, we agreed to take one careful step at a time. We talked for hours, honestly and openly, about our fears, our past mistakes, and the possibility that maybe love had been quietly growing between us while we were too afraid to name it. When the sun finally began to disappear, we walked outside and sat together on the porch. The old house no longer felt like a place I had to leave behind. It felt like the beginning of something new. I understood then that sometimes life doesn't give you a dramatic sign or a perfect moment. Sometimes it gives you a person who stays through your worst days, remembers your smallest victories, and quietly chooses you again and again. Maricel had been doing that for years. I had simply been too afraid to notice. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that the strongest relationships can begin with genuine friendship, and subscribe to Kindness Echoes. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. And before the ending, I have one special request. Comment, I believe in second chances, if you think some people are meant to find their way back to each other, even after years of silence and fear. The next morning, we stood in the kitchen making breakfast while sunlight filled the room. Nothing about the house had changed overnight. The boxes were still there. The leaking pipe still needed to be repaired. The future was still uncertain. But when Maricel reached across the counter and held my hand, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the greatest love story doesn't begin with two strangers meeting for the first time. Sometimes it begins with two best friends finally finding the courage to see each other clearly.